This is video 2 for December 10th. We're now going on to the Haitian Revolution. So the events of the American and French Revolution led to the extraordinary Third Revolution. Prior to the 1789, Saint-Domingue, later Haiti, reaped huge profits through a ruthless system of slave-based plantation agriculture, like mainly coffee and sugar. News of revolution in France lit a powder keg under the whites, free people of color, and slaves on the island. That's mainly the main different classes in Haiti, were whites, which you actually had Europeans and Creoles, free people of color, and slaves. Free people of color and slaves took matters into their own hands and eventually had Haiti what becomes Haiti go independent. All right, so we're going to look at the revolutionary aspirations in Saint-Domingue. On the eve of the French Revolution, Saint-Domingue was rife with even more social tensions than France was in the same time. The western third of Hispaniola, remember the island itself, this whole island here is Hispaniola. The western side is where Saint-Domingue is. This is the French-controlled side. The eastern side is the Spanish-controlled side. So we're only talking about this area over here. It was mixed with social groups who didn't trust each other. The Europeans on the island included French colonial officials, wealthy plantation owners, and merchants, as well as some poor artisans and clerks. These are the guys who ran the island. Creoles, as you recall, were whites who were born on the island itself. They also developed a lot of wealth too, mainly plantation owners, but they had different interests because essentially they're going to have feelings of want to be independent away from France more than the actual Europeans are. And then you have the colony's 500,000 enslaved people and 40,000 free people of color, which you might want to abbreviate FPOC because we're going to talk about the FPOCs a lot. And they obviously greatly outnumber the whites on the island. Okay, so now we're looking at island conditions. Legal and economic conditions vastly favored whites. Most of the enslaved population performed grueling work on sugar plantations. The outnumbered planters used brutal methods like beating and maiming and executing to maintain control. The 1685 Code Noir, or the Black Code, which is basically their slave codes, set the standards for slavery, which was supposed to have humane treatment, but was rarely enforced. Masters thought it was actually more cost-effective to work slaves hard and just buy new ones than try to constantly feed and take adequate care of their slaves. So there's a lot of resentment developing within the slaves. It also resulted in a constant flow of new slaves. There's always new slaves coming in from Africa to Haiti or Saint-Domingue, which is going to lead to their undoing. All right, free people of color. Despite brutality, slaveholders did free a surprising number of slaves, mostly their mixed-race children. This made up one of the largest populations of free people of color in the world. And the Code Noir originally gave FPOCs the same legal rights as whites. They could own property, they could live anywhere basically, and they could pursue education and careers. By the 1760s, the rising prosperity of the FPOCs provoked resentment from the white population, which led to whites by the 1760s and 70s removing many of the rights they've had for a long period of time. All right, and they also had different goals. The 1780s turmoil and ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity raised new possibilities. 90% of the population was enslaved and thought this would lead to abolition. So with all the things that are happening in France and the beginning of the revolution, a lot of the slaves, 90% of their population, thought this might lead to the abolition. FPOCs thought that this would lead to them getting their enfranchisement as well as equal status with whites again. So they basically thought they'd get a lot of their rights back. Creoles didn't like talk about abolition and wanted to protect their way of life. They basically wanted to look more like the southern colonies of the United States, where whites maintain control over slaves, and they have a representative government that they run themselves, and not where everybody's free on the island. So all these different groups on the island had different objectives. Okay, pre-revolt changes, and that's where we're going to stop, and we'll be done with this until tomorrow. The National Assembly, the first government of France, didn't please everyone. Didn't really please anyone on the island. No constitutional safeguards were given to the colonies, and they also reaffirmed France's monopolies over the colonies. So basically nothing changed. And this angered all the island groups because nothing benefited any of the groups at all whatsoever. Then you had a guy show up in July of 1790 named Vincent Auger. Vincent Auger shows up in July of 1790, who came from Paris, determined to win the rights for the people there. He raised an army of several hundred people and sent a letter to the island government demanding political rights for all free citizens. He then began an armed insurrection after his offer was refused, but his army was put down after a few victories. Auger was tortured and executed after his army was put down. And Paris became more sympathetic towards Saint-Domingue, and in May of 91, the National Assembly granted rights essentially back to the free people of color. But the colonial governor refused to enforce these rights, or these equal rights that they had developed, and so that's when you see violence erupt between the whites and the free people of color, as well as the slaves. And we'll stop there, and we'll pick up with the rest of the Haitian Revolution tomorrow.